go.
All right, here we go.
Come here.
All right, another second.
We're live. I got a notification.
Say hi, Boston.
Hello.
When'd
When'd you get a puppy?
Mine is snoring in the background.
I didn't get a puppy. I'm borrowing a puppy.
I see.
His name is Boston.
Appropriate.
I see us, Beth, on Facebook. So we're live.
You do? Okay, so we're on. I can't tell.
Yeah, we are.
We're all here.
are.
Hello. Say hi.
We're here.
We're here.
All right, I'm just seeing for myself the proof. All right, well, you're telling me we're good. That means we're alive.
Yeah.
So let's do this. All right, this is our first Facebook Live event, guys. Thank you, everybody who's arrived. I'm sorry? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Oh, it's better.
Yes. Okay. All right. So thank you guys. Thank you for bearing with us. Welcome. This is Elevate Northeast. This is our community conversation, our first virtual discussion that we've had in recognition of Juneteenth. Today is June 19th. It's an important holiday and day in American history, and one that recently a lot of people are saying, I've never heard of that, or why does that matter? Why are people talking about that right now? And so TaShonda and Cara and I, the directors of Elevate Northeast, the other day were talking about it and said, hey, let's have a conversation about it. So we looped in Tito Jackson, one of our board members, and Jennifer Gaskin, who's one of our community outreach specialists. And we're just going to talk about Juneteenth. We'll have the Q&A open to just talk about, candidly, what our experiences are, why it matters, and really, this is something that's been, I think, is an example of the systematic racism that we've all kind of now we're seeing, that this was omitted from the history books that we had, at least in my public schools. So we're going to talk about it. So TaShonda, you want to kick things off here?
Sure. So it's great to be back with our community, our friends, our colleagues, our advisors. I know COVID's hit us. We're living in a different world. This is our new normal. So thank you for bearing with us at Elevate Northeast as we make the adjustment. So extremely excited and both a little heavy this evening coming to have this conversation, given where we are currently in society with current events. But Juneteenth, the minute we had the opportunity and just a precursor, we've been working a little bit behind the scenes to do a bit more. We'll talk about that, I'm pretty sure, soon. But we've been trying to figure out what we can do to continue to educate and enlighten our communities and make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that we're having informed conversations. So for the first time tonight, we're going to have a candid discussion. You guys know us, we traditionally have a run of show and program and everything for you. And we have a little bit of an outline so that way the conversation can be directed, but it's going to be extremely candid. So we'll talk about our experiences. And we just ask that everyone be compassionate. I do believe that was on the invite, and be open and just be prepared in ways to maybe touch on sensitive topics, but that's what we're here for. We're all family, we're all friends. And I think it's going to be a great one. So I think if we can just begin to talk a little bit about the history of Juneteenth, what is the celebration? What is the meaning of it? Tito, you're the history major here amongst us. So why don't you share a little bit of that with us?
Thank you so much, TaShonda. And I finally get to use my African American history degree. I'm actually very happy about this, and in a time where so much is and so many things are so heavy, in particular when we think about Breonna Taylor's family, George Floyd's family, Ahmaud Arbery's family. I think it's really critical that we think of and lift up Juneteenth. It's amazing that last year this was an asterisk, and this year I turned on my Facebook and I see Black Fist at the top left corner of my Facebook. And so we have an opportunity to celebrate. And I also believe that so as all this heavy stuff is happening, that Black joy is a sign of resistance. That Black people celebrating freedom. So one, we need to put in perspective that on July 4th, 1776, Black people in the United States were still slaves. So as we talk about Independence Day, and we obviously had Frederick Douglass, who was one of the most amazing Bostonians, who asked the question, what does it mean to be to a slave to commemorate the 4th of July, right? But so let's get into what actually happened, historically. I think one, we need to put in perspective that the Civil War was one of the most violent wars that we've ever had, taking the lives of over 600,000, generally young men and boys. And Black people fought on both sides of this war, and in every war that has occurred here on the U.S. ground. So I think when people speak to these issues of patriotism, Black folks' blood has been shed in every single, and oftentimes in the Civil War, they sent slaves in place of their sons, right? To do their service. And so let's get to the end of the war, some of the things that began to precipitate around 1862. Understand Abraham Lincoln is the president, and we have the Emancipation Proclamation formally issued on January 1st, 1863. But I will note that that's a funny slip, but in history, 100 years is not that much, right? So January 1st, 1863, and it declares, understand what the Emancipation Proclamation declared. It did not declare freedom for everyone. The Emancipation Proclamation only declared freedom for enslaved persons in the Confederate States of America. So the Union States, that Emancipation Proclamation was not declaring freedom for those folks. And I think it is important to note that. And then kind of fast forwarding to the end of the war. So that's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. The war does not end, and General Lee doesn't actually surrender until 2 days before my birthday in 1865. So April 9th, 1865. The news of the surrender. That was when he surrendered. Now, interestingly, that news. So that's April. This is also harvest season. So in that harvest season, what we actually began to see was essentially the timing from April till this date, June 19th, the Texas folks wanted to pull in another harvest. So the landowners, the slaveholders in Texas, delayed letting slaves go until June 19th. It was actually declared by a general whose last name was Granger. So actually, interestingly, if any of y'all have a last name out there with Granger, this might be someone who is your family. And I do want to note that he announced General Order Number 3, and it states, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves, and understand this is so interesting because this is even more progressive language than some of the places that we have now. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between the employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly. This is it. This is the not good part. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Put in perspective, it again does end slavery, and definitely was a change legally from what was previously going on. But we will get into some of the kind of secondary effects of this. What I will note, and I think I will toss it back to TaShonda after this, is that this was a day of jubilation. After all that folks had been through. And remember, there's a diversity of people on these plantations. So you have potentially TaShonda could have been Harriet Tubman, someone who was actually leaving. You could have had you had slaves who would tell on folk, right? So let's also not let's keep it real. Not everybody was on the team to roll. You had slaves who, like a Nat Turner, who said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to just go ahead and take folk out as they're taking us out." And so there's a diversity of opinion. You had people who, from a biblical perspective, might have thought there's a hierarchy, and that was definitely something that was drilled in to folks along the way. But it is critical to note how happy folk were to have this actually come to them at that point in Galveston, Texas. And so we connect this with our happiness today. And in fact, our happiness is a form of protest. It is a form of protest that we are here today. We ain't going nowhere. And we are demanding, challenging, and pushing the United States of America to live up to the enlightened documents that many of the founders, while smoking what was in our industry, actually participated in writing. I do want to note there is a critical component for cannabis and hemp in our mix. So we do need to note that the state of Kentucky had one of the largest amounts of hemp being grown during slavery. And in fact, slavery probably would not have existed at that time had it not been for hemp. It was very difficult to raise at that time. We do need to put in perspective that Thomas Jefferson, Monticello, who had his own issues with slaves, and we can get into that later. But he also grew hemp. And there were, in England, there were estates, there was a time where the Queen mandated that people grow hemp. And there was indentured servitude as well as slavery. And so at about 1850, there were over 8,000 hemp farms. And so we also have to, if we're putting our industry in perspective, and this is why it's so damn challenging, but also the right thing to do, to make sure that we're deliberate in making sure that Black people are at the forefront of this cannabis industry. If not, we literally go back to this component of Black folk having been slaves. So we talk about the prison industrial complex, which 13th Amendment basically states that you can't do the slavery thing, but if someone is in jail, then they can be made to work. And everybody that's on this, you should see the movie 13th, right? So that's a critical component here. So with all of that said, Juneteenth is Freedom Day for Black folk in the United States of America. It is our day where we get to celebrate that. And I will say, I know many people are critical of folk awakening this year. Kind of like, you know, there's a new announcement that Black people exist and that police brutality exists and all that. I am optimistic and very happy that people are finally getting it. They're finally inquiring about it. And it will be my hope and guidance and working with Elevate and other organizations and also my company, Verdant Medical, to make sure that we finally get our just due when it comes to moving from enslavement to enfranchisement, full enfranchisement, and the ability to build wealth along that time. One last component, I'm going to toss it back to TaShonda. This is also why we have a wealth gap. So understand the reason why, and as folks look at affirmative programs, the reason why we have a wealth gap is that understand the Granger family, who's in the Army, but many of these folks who enslave folk, that wealth does not go away. It gets handed down from generation to generation. And then from wars, Black soldiers who were coming back from World War II were not even given the GI Bill, which meant that they couldn't buy a house. So their inability to buy a home in 1946, which might have been in the south end of Boston, a triple decker in the south end of Boston, which is now worth $4 or $5 million, means that their families have been robbed. And in Boston, we have a median net worth of white families of $247,500 versus a median net worth of Black families of $8. Today, we celebrate. All the days moving forward, we continue to do the work.
Awesome. So thank you for that, Tito. Just to summarize a bit for us, Juneteenth is a celebration of the actual freedom of all slaves. So though the Emancipation Proclamation was delivered in 1863, where it did not reach Texas, which was the last state, I believe it was Galveston,
yep.
To actually free their slaves. And that came over 2 years later, which was in 1865. So in between that time, just from what I've researched, there were about 250,000 slaves in Texas and Galveston in that area at that time. So imagine 250,000 people being left behind and not aware that they were free. You were free for 2 years, and where it didn't reach you for 2 years. Imagine how many people died, how many slaves died during that time. You died believing and thinking that you were a slave and you were actually free. So our conversation is going to continue to evolve. Tito did a really good job of I think, identifying a very critical timeline in the African-American community. One that identifies many promises of freedom, but as we get to today, you see that we're still fighting for it. So, Jennifer, why do you think most people haven't heard about this holiday?
I mean, frankly, we were not taught this in school. We weren't taught it in college. I mean, the kids that learned it were probably the kids that took Africana studies in college. But other than that, you know, you're not learning that unless, you know, it's being given to you from your ancestors, right? And my husband and I actually were just having a conversation about this, about how, you know, many of us, you know, on my generation and the generation below, miss that oral history being passed along to us. And I think, for me, I'm really, really thankful, that I spent so much time in the Caribbean where I did learn, the truth about Christopher Columbus. So when I came up here and I went to school and they started teaching, this character of Christopher Columbus, I'm like, but wait, I come from a town in Grenada where the natives jumped off the cliff not to be enslaved by the Europeans that invaded the island. So you're not going to really teach me that Christopher Columbus is this great man when I know him to be not so great. So I think, unfortunately, our children, we weren't taught. We weren't taught the true history. We were taught that George Washington had wood teeth, but he actually had teeth from a slave. So like, we were taught this, nobody wanted to have the difficult conversations that we're now being forced to have. They didn't want to have those conversations with their children. So instead of that, they just got rid of the history that we all are now becoming aware of. And I think the other thing that jumps out to me a lot, or I've had a lot of conversations as a person of Caribbean descent, is that I actually had a conversation, I want to say I was an adult, so I'll say probably about 10 years ago with somebody. And it was a Black person, and they said to me, well, I thought Caribbean people didn't think that they were Black. First of all, when I'm driving down the road in my vehicle and the police see me driving down the road in my vehicle, or they see my husband driving down the road in the vehicle, nobody's pausing to say, well, I wonder if she's Black, like American Black, or Caribbean Black. Because if she's Caribbean Black, then we can let her go. Like, that doesn't happen. I'm a Black woman, regardless of where my, nationality comes from. So I deal with the same things. I just think that what has been different for me is that I've had a battle within my own community, within my Black community, as being a Caribbean. And then I've also had the same struggles and battles that I have as just being a Black person in America. So, the British Empire freed slaves or emancipated slaves in 1834. And it's all my life, August 1st has been a holiday in the Caribbean. So for me, it's like, what do you mean Juneteenth isn't a holiday? What do you mean people don't know what it is? Like, we shut down everything, August 1st, it's Emancipation Day. So, I just think it speaks to what Tito was mentioning, is that we literally got left behind in 1863. And we're continuing to be, trying to catch up, but there's such a head start at this point. There really just has to be a lot of aggressive reform.
Agreed. Beth, I think we had the same conversation where you were telling me in your experience that obviously like this was not a conversation in the area of Massachusetts you grew up in.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a town called Holden, Massachusetts. If you're familiar with Wachusett Mountain, I went to Wachusett Regional High School, 5 small towns in the middle of Massachusetts, and we didn't have Black kids at my high school. There were 1,500 kids in my school. 2 maybe were Black, not in my class. I never had that I remember, and I feel terrible saying that. I don't remember that in my class. And, I feel like I was in honors classes, I was in advanced classes, that we didn't get into these types of things. Looking back now, you almost feel cheated a little bit, because I always, I pursued American studies. That was my major in college. And I didn't learn about this that I can recall. Now, granted, college, I had a lot of fun, and I don't remember a lot of college anyway, but it was really when I started getting involved with cannabis and opening up my social network and meeting different people with different experiences, and learning about the war on drugs. I think it was honestly, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston had an art exhibit about Juneteenth, and I must have heard of it recently. And so it was just a few years ago that I learned about it. And I asked somebody else that went to my high school and to my college the other day, have you ever heard of this? Not trying to put her on the spot or anything. And she said, no. So I just feel like, you know, we were cheated out of something, an opportunity to celebrate an important part of history. But you know what, we know about it now. So that's why we're here today and talking about it, making people aware of it, and just recognizing that it is part of all of our history, and that people, this big part of Black history has been intentionally omitted from at least the public schools that I went to.
Awesome. I think what's interesting or ironic to me rather is that so as we talk about the difference in how we grew up, and I know you guys are primarily raised in Massachusetts, and honestly, I've lived there for 5 years, so I am aware of the stark difference. I am the Southerner on this call. But growing up as a Black woman, I can tell you, I grew up in predominantly Black communities, like my entire life. I went to HBCUs. I've grown up and I've been educated, and what we'll say is predominantly people of color institutions, right? Mostly Black kids. What I think is ironic though is that I didn't learn about Juneteenth in school either.
Yeah. I didn't know. I felt odd when you said that you had never heard of it. At first I was like, how does a Black person not know about it? But then I was like, it has nothing to do with your Black or white. It's that this has been left out of all of our education. So that was interesting, kind of like, that just ain't right.
Right.
One of those moments. So yeah.
Something else we have in common, right? Like we had to individually seek this education. I can tell you, American history, oh God, social studies, oh God, my entire life, all I've learned, and the history that I've learned has been occupied and been mostly white history. It's not been Black history. And honestly, you know, you say you get what you pay for. I didn't learn until college. So I had to invest in my own education, literally, to learn my own history. And I must tell you that after actually taking African-American studies and taking African-American psychology, I felt more informed, which made me feel more empowered. And I then quickly began to understand why our education is the way it is. And then when you learn, oh, that's right, it was illegal for you to read. Remember, you weren't supposed to be educated. And that systematically, since 1865, our education has continued to be either divested in, despite these great proclamations of gains. Because what is actual is not an equitable education. You don't have the same access, the same opportunity, the same learnings. But in this case, when it came to something that was so significant to my community specifically, and you know, I traditionally don't say that because I do, I love everybody, but my community, it was something that was completely stripped away from us. We even talk about, hey, I grew up in DC and Maryland. I didn't know Harriet Tubman was actually a slave in Maryland. I was taught
about, like you just said, that we're all, like most of us have been in Massachusetts for some time. A couple of months ago, I had posted pictures from the Boston busing thing. And people are like, where's that? Right? I'm like, Southie?
And that was in the 80s, right? 70s?
Well, it was 1974. And we need to put in perspective. Martin Luther King, so Brown v. Board is 54, right? Right. This is 1974, but the illustration is Martin Luther King died on April 4th, 1968. Right. And we're talking about 74, the passage, and then 75, the implementation. And there's a famous picture of a dude named Ted Landsmark, who's still alive. And I don't know if y'all have seen it. He's on City Hall Plaza. He's getting hemmed up, and he's getting jabbed with a flagpole in front of Boston.
I've seen it. I never knew his name though. I've seen it.
Building, right? And so you're right. I think, TaShonda, you bring up a really important point around the history piece. I just want to toss out a couple of books that people should check out. One of my favorite books is called Before the Mayflower. It's by a guy named Lerone Bennett. It's an interesting read because it is a historical narrative. So it reads like a story rather than kind of history books that are, and so he describes how people look, how they interacted. One of my favorite albums ever is The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Well, that actually comes from a book called The Miseducation of the Negro by a guy named Carter G. Woodson. And it actually, in terms of this piece, he speaks about Black businesses and the creation of Black businesses in and around their own neighborhoods and communities, and that fact that people kind of miss the opportunities that are in our communities. Those are two good ones. Asada by Asada Shakur is another really good one. And so the other piece is, as you read stuff, like in this COVID thing, I learned how to cook. I didn't know how to cook before. And hey, I read a bunch of stuff. You know, my souffle still kind of falls, but whatever. But
souffle, that's ambitious.
Yes, that is.
I cook almost every day. I don't know how to make a souffle. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. I'm not doing it. But the funny thing is, I've been able to teach myself stuff through YouTube and through reading books. And so what I challenge everybody, especially my white friends, learn stuff like this stuff around race. Learn stuff the way you normally learn stuff. You look at YouTube videos, you have conversations with folks. And we were talking about this earlier. People make mistakes, right? And I was joking, you know, as long as your mistakes, you know, aren't promoting my oppression, but also if it doesn't, your mistakes don't start with N words, then we can actually have a conversation about what's up. And so it's so critical that people who are so trigger shy don't think about this, and in particular people in business, because we've had, well, was it Gucci, Dove soap, but they had a commercial where you had so all of these things, and to bring it back, and I said,
and they put the baby in the monkey suit.
Yeah, exactly. You had the kid in the monkey suit. Like, so the other component here, one of the reasons why you have to have these conversations, one, why you have to have Black folk on your board, as well as your senior leadership team. So these are things that you don't miss, but you're missing markets, and you're actually missing opportunities for your businesses when it comes to this. So have these conversations and understand you may not know stuff in the beginning, but we all learned about cannabis. They didn't teach us about that in school either, right? We all read a whole lot to learn about all the strains, effects, all of the, by the way, there's all this science stuff that's out there that no one taught us about in school, but yet and still we know this. So we can reach and do the same thing with Black history.
I'll say a couple of things, and then Cara, I have a question for you. I encourage parents, and not just parents, aunts, godparents, whomever you are, like wherever you are, like I encourage you to get a young person, and I encourage you to learn with them. I encourage you to have an open and honest conversation. I encourage you to seek information that is outside of your everyday norm, because only then do you truly get to experience the richness of whom we all are. We're all humans. We're all here on this planet together. When we talk about the Americans things and this foreign, listen, we're all people at the end of the day. Like, we ended up and were born where we were, but we had no control over that. None whatsoever. I had no control over being born in Southeast DC. None. You know, I didn't even know that there was a Martha's Vineyard there. I didn't know these things existed. I had no choice. I grew up where I grew up. I had to learn to make the most out of what I had. But as an adult, I've challenged myself, and not just myself. You guys know I'm a former teacher. I pop in and out every now and again because I love little people and I believe in investing in them and pouring in them. But I've also learned this horrible trick, right? This bad thing, where a lot of parents depend on the school system to inform their children. Your child spends most of their day with educators, with other individuals that you trust to care for them. So they're only getting what they are pouring into them. Understand that if it's something outside of their comfort zone, not even comfort zone, right now with where we live, is if something outside of that Common Core curriculum, they're not learning it. and I'll stay out of the education game. You know, Tito, I can go for days. You know how I feel about it. But being on that other side, I can tell you that I remember being younger, and I remember being in school, and for me, I had mostly Black teachers growing up. Most of the teachers looked like me. I remember them taking the time that I needed to teach me in the way that I needed to be taught. That does not exist anymore. They are on the clock. They have to go over this. They have to move on. So understand also the folks that are in charge of that curriculum, they say like, you know that change will really come when the people who need it the most are leading it. We're not in charge. We're not at the table. We're not in the room having conversations when we're talking about curriculum development. We're not there when we're talking about summer reading list. Quite frankly, that's just not where it is. So we're not getting it. So you, no matter whom you are, no matter what cultural group you identify, whatever, it's your responsibility to not only educate yourself on the richness of all that we are in our history, but also a younger person, because they're not going to get it otherwise. They're not. Cara, question for you. Why do you think, why do you think there's such an interest now in this holiday? Like why do we're all on social media, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, Juneteenth, Freedom Day, celebrate this. Like, why is this a big deal? Why is it actually on CNN? Why are we actually talking about it on local news? Why does it matter?
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely got a lot to do with George Floyd, the protests, a general awakening of the culture and acceptance of the reality of the accepting that there was a lot of stuff we weren't taught in all the schools all over the country. I think that maybe it has a little to do with time, maybe our distance from, and maybe it's for white people, but it's the distance from the guilt, the guilt, the seeing the guilt. I had a racist grandfather. I had a horribly racist grandfather, and I learned every word, every name way before I should have, and I actually didn't speak to him for several years in high school because I couldn't deal with it. I was like, you want to have a relationship with me, either you change or you never bring it up again. And eventually he never brought it up again. I'm sure he didn't change, but that for me is an embarrassment. For him, maybe, he didn't see it. Maybe it's just that step between embarrassment and guilt, that it's like, okay, like I'm embarrassed by that. And I don't feel guilty for my race. I feel guilty that the people in charge who looked like me didn't do a better job. Like I feel like I can't express myself well on this. And this is, we were talking about before, like this is a difficult conversation, but you're somewhere between embarrassment and guilt.
Yeah. So the discomfort, you think? Like it's
absolutely uncomfortable,
yeah,
to admit it and to say, yes, like, I was, at one point I heard, well, the Native American people, they were here. If they really deserved America, they should have fought harder for it. Things like that run through people's heads. Today, and I've been having this conversation a lot with a couple of people that I truly love, that are in my heart. But I got the comment today, well, that was 200 years ago. And it's like, okay, but even if we're just talking about slavery, no, but but even if we're just talking about the slavery that you're going to consider slavery today in this moment, that was my friend's great grandmother. That was your great uncle that held slaves. That wasn't somebody you can identify to. They're not that far away, but maybe we've hit a space where we can recognize the guilt and the embarrassment enough to be able to improve our behavior as, you know, society in general.
I agree
I
with
think
you.
we're all stuck at home and we all saw that George Floyd video and we all saw him kneel for 8 minutes. And I don't know about anybody else, but me sitting on my knee for 8 minutes is very uncomfortable. So we all watched that and we couldn't turn away and we can't, you know, change the channel or talk about something else because we're all stuck in the house under some level of lockdown. So I think you're right. I think timing had a lot to do with it because, you know, we've had Ahmaud Arbery, we've had, you know, years ago we had, you know, things happening in Chicago, in Minneapolis, right? And we were able to just move on and go on to the next, you know, drama or whatever we're watching on the news. But whereas that we're all stuck in the house, the only other thing going on is COVID. We have to watch it. We have to pay attention. And now, because we've opened this conversation and people are out there literally protesting every single day, and we are not stopping. Now, no, you can't turn away now. You can't ignore it. You can't say, oh, I'm embarrassed by my grandfather, so now I'm just not gonna talk to him. But that's your action has to go beyond that. Like, it's not okay. It's not okay to just not be racist now. Like, you have to actively get engaged and fight against racism. It's not enough to say, well, I'm not racist, I have Black friends. Like, once the conversation starts there, I'm like, we're done.
Exactly.
But some of those people are my family. So help me, Jennifer. How do I make them listen? I feel the responsibility, and it's not your responsibility to teach me this, but I'm asking for help. Like,
honestly,
how do I?
Whenever somebody says that to me, you know what my response is?
What's that?
Slave owners also screwed their slaves. So why are you telling me that you have Black, like, how is that supposed to make me feel better when I know that some white slave owner was sleeping with their Black slave woman and making children, and then making those same children that share their DNA, blood, everything, work out in the field and beating them and calling them the N-word. So the fact that you're telling me that you have friends that are Black, if you could beat your own children and treat them as less than because they have a 50% Black in them, then you having Black friends is not enough.
Yeah.
So a little bit, you got to give me more than that.
But Cara, one of the things that I would say, and this is to all of my white friends, you have standing that Jennifer, TaShonda, and I don't have with your family.
Mm-hmm.
You're in place. You're at a table. You have a level of intimacy that we will never have with your family. And so having these, so understand, one, these are hard conversations for us too. Right? Because we don't have the option of not having the conversations, right? So I have people grab their purse, you know, when I'm and not for nothing, I'm 6'2", 270. How far am I going to run? I'm not going anywhere. But still, you have folk who, on a daily basis, as a city councilor, I was just telling friends earlier, I was at a community meeting. I actually happen to have a science background. We were talking about potentially a deadly science lab that was being placed in Boston. They spoke, and then I did my presentation. And one of the people who was on the Boston University appointed board said asshole. So that's me as an elected official in a room, very small room, and then didn't want to back it up. It said he was talking about Athol, Massachusetts, right? But not, all of that said, we need you to have those uncomfortable conversations with white family. And what do you say? I can't tell you exactly what to say or your mode of persuasion, but the fact that you're raising it, the fact that they make you uncomfortable, but the fact that you make them uncomfortable when they're wearing a MAGA hat at the table, or they're saying things that are wrong, characterizing them. That level of awareness, even if you get to the point where, and I have had people in my family who use the B word for women. Yeah, bro, you can't say that about me. And then they get uncomfortable. So the next time they go to say it, yeah, daggone Tito's here. I can't be, I can't. So I think that's one level, but then doing your homework and beginning to bring out, because by the way, Juneteenth is uniquely American history, right? It's as American as apple pie when it comes down to really what it is. And then we're not even talking about Jim Crow laws. So when we say, that was 200 years ago, actually, we're really talking about laws that were passed in the 1960s that actually allowed us to vote.
Affirmative. Hello, sir. We keep going. Affirmative action was when 19 what?
70s, 80s, and then wiped out, right? And then wiped out.
Wasn't it 80s, 90s, right? 80s.
Yeah, and the courts have recently wiped out. And again, at the beginning in the 90s, you started to have court cases, even at Boston Latin School, by the way, where they had an affirmative program, and then these cases got pushed back, whereas people felt, and this is one thing we got to note. By the way, some things are going to have to change, and there's going to be some uncomfortability, because you can't have an all-white male board of directors and say, and I appreciate your press release and your Facebook post and your LinkedIn post. I appreciate that. But it can't be all white guys on your board anymore. It can't be and with no women and no black folk. You can't also have a leadership team that doesn't reflect folk. So yeah, there's another level of uncomfortability that's going to have to happen, because as TaShonda was saying, not only we got to be at the table making the menu, right? So that's another component, Cara. But I encourage my white friends to sit with this, to engage with their family, and to have uncomfortable and hard conversations. And that there's a place there that black folk, and I would submit to you that racism gets solved when white people become as offended and as angry as we have to be when a racist act occurs.
If I can add something as one of your other white friends, Tito, I've been thinking about, having some of these tough conversations with my family and friends. And what I've realized is that it's reminding me a lot of when I first started getting involved with cannabis advocacy. Cannabis was illegal. I was a loser. I was a druggie because I wanted anything to do with it. And I carried a lot of personal shame about coming out to tell people that this was an industry that I was looking to transfer my career into. And the more I learned about the harms of the war on drugs and learning about like the government owning the patent on cannabinoids, because they realized that certain cannabinoids can protect the brain. And that enraged me because my grandmother, and probably my grandmother passed away with dementia. And that's the type of thing that's going to trickle down through the generations. So the more I armed myself with information, in the case with cannabis, we could look at science and data and provide people in our conversations, not just like, I believe it should be legal because I like to use it. It's, hey, look at the history around this, look at this science and this data. And I think we can do that same kind of approach as we're advocating for our loved ones here, our Black friends in our community. Arming ourselves with information, taking the time to read some of the things that probably should have been required reading when we were kids, Googling, watching those YouTube videos like Tito was saying. I think when we're armed with real information, real science, real just history that we can point to, I think that helps empower us and gives us a little more comfort in those conversations. Because at the end of the day, I say, in cannabis, we're on the right side. We are right about this. And I think it's the same thing here. We are right. So when we go into these conversations, I think particularly as we're educated and empowered with information, we are right. We are going to win this argument, even if that, it ends up crazy. We can leave that conversation knowing that we were right, because we know. And hopefully they, even if maybe in that conversation, get upset or defensive, or I don't understand why this, that's the key to say, if you don't understand why, here's some information. This is what helped me understand it. So that's just kind of maybe a strategy that I'm trying, because I know I have some horrible conversations coming up in my life.
What did you or Cara feel watching the George Floyd video, like, or even watching the protests or the things that have happened after, like, where are you guys at emotionally? What are you guys feeling?
So watching George Floyd get murdered, I mean, it could have been any person. What I saw was a murder. I saw the look of a murderer standing over his victim. It could have been an Asian woman. It could have been anybody. What we saw was a murder. And I think you're not a real good human being if you're not affected by that. A couple days after that, after I watched it, I didn't watch it immediately because I knew what it was going to be. I went to a protest, or excuse, it was a peaceful vigil to support Black lives in Weymouth, Massachusetts. And if you know anything about the busing, you know that the South Shore of Massachusetts is where a lot of folks from Boston left because they were just appalled at the thought of sharing their space with Black people. So the South Shore is a crazy place, and it's where I live, and that's, I think it's how I've become a little bit sensitive to that. But anyway, at that the rally, they did an 8-minute and 47-second moment of silence, and there were hundreds of people across this big football field, and it was so quiet. And my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, let's take a knee. I hadn't thought about what we would do. Some people laid down, some people laid down in the position that George Floyd had been in. But I decided I would take a knee. I hadn't really thought much about it. And my legs, I'm not the most, in shape person, but you could see the people around us, legs shaking. Like, to sit there in that position for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that's more than enough time to realize what you're doing to his body. How was that officer's body not sore from doing that? It's just unfathomable and so upsetting. And I encourage everyone, I've been saying to people, do something for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Think of somebody suffering, what that felt like, every breath that he was trying to take, and to think about those cops, all those cops around that, how it wasn't stopped. I cannot believe that. And I don't think you have to be Black, white, or anything to be horribly disturbed by that.
I think, I'm a mom, so I think my first thoughts were how am I going to explain this to the toddler? Like, he's in the room when the news is on. He comes to me, when this hits the news and it's all, it's gone viral and everyone's talking about it. And he comes to me and he goes, "Yeah, mommy, all cops are bad. They're bad. The cops are the bad guys now." And like that, I can't have my toddler thinking that all the cops are the bad guys at this point, because God forbid there is an emergency. He has to have the wherewithal to call for help. Now, if we change the system and make major corrections, that's one thing. But right now, like, Paw Patrol is it. Like, I don't want him to be afraid of the things that are supposed to make, and the people and the figures and the uniforms that are supposed to make him feel safe in our society. And the fact that, and he's white, his father's white, he's coming to me and saying, "Well, the cops are the bad guys. The cops are killing people." Like that, like that's what happened. And I'm just like, okay, let's try and break this down to the level that he can sort of grasp it. And that's sort of been my, how my biggest sort of reaction to it is how am I gonna raise my kid in this world? Like, how am I going to raise him in this world? And a serious consideration now, and this is interesting because this came to me the other day, but with the COVID, he's been in a daycare that has several different varietals, if you will, the cannabis people out there. And he is around all these different cultures and different languages, and mommies and daddies are all different colors, and I'm afraid to put him back in school, and I'm concerned that that's going to limit his interaction, because I think that I'm just in a place in the world where it just ends up being much more difficult to force that environment. It's not a natural place. So I'm concerned on both of these things. I'm concerned about how am I gonna make sure that my son isn't afraid of the police, but also how am I gonna make sure that he has enough interaction with different environments and different communities and different people of color, and grows up in a space where he can see everything and the beauty that's in everyone and the beauty that's in all of our different cultures. These are the things that are sort of like, that have been weighing on me lately after George Floyd and the protests and everything else that's happening in the world around us. It's how do I break this down for a 3-year-old so that I don't cause him some permanent trauma?
I think what's unique is that, and again, we're much more alike than we are different, despite our treatment. Hearing you speak, it's no difference than the concerns that my mother had for me and for my brothers. Her concern was, how do I raise this Black woman who is born with what I know is 2 strikes against her? She's Black and she's a woman. When we look at history, we know we're the last on any totem pole. We're not in a race to marginalization. You know, I don't believe in that. But you have to look at history, right? We got to know where we've been to know where we are and where we need to go and where we need to go away from. But to hear you say that, Cara, my mother, born in Virginia, she had the same concerns. Jennifer.
I was just, when you were talking, I was thinking, frankly, I have the same thoughts. I mean, my oldest son is 25 years old, and I actually posted it on LinkedIn today, because I was reflecting on, like, what has his experience been with the police? And him as an adult Black male, and much like you, Tito, he's 6 foot, 200 pounds. So and he has locks. So just him coming towards you, depending on where you are at, he could come as being threatening. And he actually works for Amazon. He delivers. He's an Amazon Prime driver. And he actually texted me about 2 to 3 weeks ago and said, "Mommy, I'm not really even comfortable in this area that I'm in. It's an all white area. And I'm like the only Black person walking around. And here I am walking up to people's houses and approaching their front door as an Amazon driver." And, you know, I said to him, I said, his name is Louis. I said, "Louis, make sure you whenever you get out the truck, you got your phone in your hand. You know, anybody, if you feel funny, start recording. You know, make sure that you really, like, honestly, I felt like I was teaching him what to do if a bear comes after him, like, make yourself look big, you know, watch a video, whatever." And I hung up the phone with him and I cried. Because I'm like, this is my 25-year-old son, 6 foot, 200 pounds, teases me when I'm like, "Can you get that from the top of the shelf?" You know, but he's afraid just to walk around being himself. Like, yeah. You know, and then I'm like, well, what did I do? I brought these 3 children into this world where I feel helpless to protect them. So I'm having those same thoughts and conversations with myself also. So I think that's normal.
And you would assume there's things that you assume that you grow out of. And in my mind, when I was a young person, I would say when I'm an adult, then politics don't work. You don't stop people don't stop feeling you just because you are wearing a suit. Because I've worn a suit for most of my career. And I'll tell you, I'm 45. I grew up in an area that people would consider tough. I lived in the same house my whole life. And the only 3 times that I've had a gun pulled on me, the person on the other side was a police officer.
It's crazy that you said the only 3 times someone's pulled a gun on me. Like,
I actually posted this on Facebook because I wanted to see the reactions. I wanted to see the difference between people who were not Black, how many times they've had a gun pulled on them versus people who are Black. And every single person that responded on my post that was Black at least had 2 times. Yeah. And there was many people of other colors that said 0 times, never. I've never had a gun pulled on me. Yeah. When I thought about it, I've had a gun pulled on me 8 times. 6 out of the times were by police officers.
I'm sorry.
Right, but you know what? I appreciate the levity of saying this is not normal.
No.
Not
Right.
normal.
So this is like for you to pull us back and say like, okay, by the way, I said 3, 8. Okay, let's pull back that it is not normal or okay that people are in a situation where one of the situations, I had a piece of cardboard in my hand and the police walked into the room and they said, freeze, hold it, drop it. They were behind me. And my friend, Jason, God rest his soul, he passed away about a year ago. He knows me so well, and he just knows I'm an inquisitive person. So he smacked the piece of cardboard out of my hand before I turned around. And I turned around to 2 police officers who both had their guns drawn. And if I had turned around with that piece of cardboard that was in my hand, we would possibly be having a different conversation. And I could possibly be one of the hashtags that you guys are repeating right now. And so I think it's really critical that we have the very real conversation that Black people acting better, people wearing a belt, pulling your pants up, wearing a belt, not having dreads, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, none of that
has anything to do.
It has nothing to do with
And
anything.
so that's one of the things we just gotta out that right now and just put it on the table. Like there's no aspect of this that is now, mind you, putting your hands on the wheel and all that other stuff could possibly keep you alive in some of these situations, at least for me but when it comes down to it, like I got stopped because I'm a Black dude.
Right.
The first interaction was because of who I am and the face that I have, whether I have a tie around my neck or whether I'm wearing a white tee and Timbs. That's why I got stopped. And then all of the other stuff is an afterthought. We just got to put that out there.
I think
What do you say to people when they talk about why don't people just comply with the police? Why do Black people fight with the police?
You know what I do? And I'm gonna jump in here. The one
okay, I want to know.
My favorite thing in the world is because we all have these cell phones, right? The first thing I do is pull up videos of people of non-color, right? European Americans cussing out cops, stealing their cars, beating them with billy clubs, spitting at them, fighting them, and you watch how these cops, they run from them. They run from them. They do everything they can to not even de-escalate, because they're trying to de-escalate at first, which is crazy because you would just think they're not trying to do that. But it's amazing the empathy that you have for someone you don't deem as a threat, right? So they're in these situations and it's crazy and haywire, and like they crash into their police cars, steal their police vehicles, and listen, the interesting part is, my favorite is when I'm able to do this in mixed company. And what I mean is when it's, hey, my Black friends and my white friends, right? Because it always goes like this. You literally see my white friends looking and they're like, oh. My Black friends, meanwhile, are like, oh my God, oh, they're gonna kill him.
Right, they're gonna kill him.
Oh my God, he's gonna die. Oh my God, they're gonna kill him. All of my Black friends do that. And that's because we're conditioned that way, because that is our lived experience. That is what happens to us. Then I pull out, so Tamir Rice was playing with the play gun in the park, little kid by himself, cops and robbers, right? Shot dead, right? Okay. George Floyd, did he have anything? Was he armed at all? No. He had nothing. He cried and begged, please, the whole time. Not a threat at all. He died in front of us all. Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her bed. She was sleeping in her bed. Police came with a no-knock warrant. Hello, you're not a police officer at that time. You're somebody who's at my door trying to break in. When her boyfriend tried to defend because he thought someone was breaking in, their safety was compromised. That child was shot 8 times. 8 times.
That's what I show. You don't get to tell me about compliance anymore. No. We saw that with Rodney King. That was my first introduction to watching someone who looks like me get beat within a half inch of their life was Rodney King. But meanwhile, I watch my others. You watch this. They have this way of just only literally showing empathy and concern, and they're going to actually protect certain folks. For us, they police us. It's been policing. Remember the history of this organization. They were slave cavalries.
Slave hunters.
Do you understand? If you didn't have paper, guys, I don't mean to be this impatient, but see, Beth,
wait. I'm going to show you my shirt. Look.
It's hard. And something that we have been grappling with behind the scenes, right? And something that we talk about often, and we've been in these conversations, and my friends will ask me, how do I feel? How do I feel? Outside of crying, which I've been doing a lot of lately, because that's just where I am. I don't know how to explain to you what it feels like to fight for freedom for 400 plus years. I don't know how to explain to you the frustration that I have and trying and having, it is my responsibility to point out the inequities, the injustice, and the problems to you. 400 plus years. Let's really put it in perspective. First boats of African slaves arrived in America in 1619. Emancipation Proclamation, Juneteenth, 1865. That's 246 years from the time we landed to somebody saying, oh, we're going to let these, finally, we were people. We weren't even people then, we were property. This was all over control at the end of the day anyway. So the Northerners, the good folks said, no, we don't want you crazy people in the South to have control no more. The reason that you got so much control is because you got wealth. You know where your wealth is. Your wealth is in slavery. So you didn't do this out the kindness of your heart. That's the real truth of it. People have only changed because they've had to, and they never really changed. They just changed the outside. Because now what I can literally point out to you, because we just said it, right? Right? We just talked about Emancipation Proclamation. You tell me why do I need a 13th Amendment to prove that I'm a human being? That I should have rights? It's a cute little constitution you got. It's a cute little Declaration of Independence, but it doesn't apply to me. It's never applied to me. My responsibility has been to fight to make you see that it should apply to me for 400 plus years. It makes no sense. From 1865, from the time we were free, to 2020, Rayshard Brooks just got shot in the back, right? Mm-hmm. So 2020, that's 155 years. But you want me to keep participating. You want me to keep believing. You want me to keep hoping that this is going to change. And I'm telling you guys, as one of your friends, we sit, we talk, we spend time together. You know my heart. You know my focus is on the community and building us all up. Every one of us. 400 plus years, I am tired. Mm-hmm. Tired. So the only thing you're going to get from me is my passion, my tears. We've got to change. I'm glad we're here. Let's give some people some action items and steps that they can do to help promote the change that we need.
Awesome. I just want to thank you, TaShonda, for doing something we don't often do enough, was to just speak your heart. Unadulterated, unedited, just real shit. Hopefully my mom's not listening.
Hold on, I'm texting her now to say you use bad words.
Brother curse for the first time on Facebook, but that's one of the other pieces. So one, listen to folk, listen to understand what so, because by the way, these changes that we're talking about, one, we don't have the privilege to check out because our blackness is present, and I'm happy. By the way, stop saying that you don't see black. Cut it out.
Yeah.
Stop it. Because by the way, and I think Michael Chariot tweeted this the other day, it's really cool to be black, by the way. I really like it. What sucks is some of the police stuff, all kinds of other things, but it is who I am, and it is my identity. So when you say you don't see me as black, you're saying you don't see me. That's what that equates. And by the way, you don't get off the hook, and it doesn't make me feel good, and you haven't made progress. But in terms of some of the things, one of the things legislatively, I would say there are 3 laws that I want people to look up and push in whatever state that they're in. One is the Eric Garner law, which says that police are not allowed to use chokeholds and kill people. And if they are, that they are criminally liable as well as civilly liable for that. A second one is the Andrew Curse Act. Andrew Curse was a brother from New York. He was in Poughkeepsie, New York. He was detained by the police. He begged 70 times over the course of 25 minutes to get some emergency medical help. He died 1 minute before he got to the police station. When they got to the police station, they dropped him on the ground, and they were laughing and carrying on, drinking coffee, and this man died right in front of the police station. He's the father of 7. And his now, mind you, the first 2, Eric Garner law and Andrew Curse Act, have just passed the legislative body in New York, and have now been signed into law by Andrew Cuomo. We need to do that in every state in the union. In addition, the last one is the Stephon Clark law, which says that police can be held criminally liable as well as civilly liable for shooting unarmed people like Richard and in their back when they're running away and not a threat. So from a legislative, by the way, I feel really as young people say, some kind of way that we have to put a law in place to tell the police to not shoot somebody in the back as they're running away. So those are some legislative components. These are now also at the federal level also, but I would say please support those folks. And then last on my list, but not least, Violence in Boston, which is a great organization run by Monica Cannon Grant, who's doing the work right here. Financially support her. Go to her website. If you and on Monday, she's also leading a Breonna Taylor march that begins at Madison Park. And I'll look up the time right now. Those are some actionable steps that you can actually participate in very soon.
I have a few, but I figure we'll go around. Jennifer, any from you?
I just, yeah, I mean, I think honestly, just be nice to each other. I mean, I know that sounds like some Rodney King mess, but really just see each other. To Tito's point, like we can't walk around pretending that color doesn't exist. And I agree with you, being a Black person is awesome. So we have to see each other for who we are, and really, take the time to show each other care. And frankly, Cara, Beth, all of our white allies, if you see something and it doesn't look right, you stand there and you say something. Because sometimes we don't have a voice. Speak for us. If you see, a Black man on the side of the road with, police officers surrounding his vehicle, you pull over and you ask that man if he is okay. because that could be my son, that could be my husband, that could be one of my nephews. And you don't want to be watching the news later on that night and realize that there was something that you could have done. So please, honestly, if I see something happening, I'm going to stop. I'm going to ask, I'll record, whatever. But I'm going to raise that flag. So I just ask that, you know, we all do that as a community and raise the flag and don't be silent and don't stop. Because this isn't going to be easy. You know, as TaShonda said, this is 400 years, 600 years, if you add in the time from, you know, there's just a lot of change that has to happen. There's a lot of emotion. And I just want people to really see each other and act as a community and support one another and be there for one another and speak out when you see things wrong. Like, it's okay to be the voice in the room. It's okay to be the angry Black woman. Yes, I'm angry. I'm mad. Get over it. So I just would say, you know, take care of each other.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to kindness. If we all just treated people like human beings and were kind, I mean, just recognizing each other as humans, wouldn't it be a better world? I guess I'm just going to go back to what I was saying about education. I mean, a big reason we even started Elevate is because people had, cannabis was very stigmatized. People didn't understand what was happening. And we realized, you know, whether you're trying to advocate for cannabis or ending racism or, you know, something like breast cancer, whatever it happens to be, you know, putting yourself out there with information, educating yourself about it, and not being afraid to share that information, you know, paying it forward, you know, education and information becomes a privilege that you have that other people don't have. And it's a privilege in and of itself to be able to share that. So, I mean, several years ago, somebody, Wendy at the ACLU said something that really stuck with me and just something that to share with, you know, my fellow white family and friends. You know, we have privilege just by the way we look. And what we can do, you know, it's sad, it's frustrating, it's emotional, it's confusing. How do we help people? But I think we can use that privilege that we have to get, you know, the minds and the attention of people that look like us. Like Tito was saying, he doesn't have that privilege. He's not going to be able to get my aunties and uncles in a room and talk like it just wouldn't necessarily happen, you know. But if I come and tell them, you know I changed their minds about cannabis, you know, the stigma that was there about me being a cannabis person, they changed their mind because I gave them information and I was compassionate in how I delivered it. And I knew what I was dealing with. I knew my audience, and I provided information from sources that they would maybe, you know, trust more than others. And that's a big thing. Again, I'm a marketing person too. You know, when you're trying to convey a message, think about the source that you're sharing with that person. Like I've been active on my town. I live in Norwell, Massachusetts, very white town, and people posting stuff in the Norwell social page about, I don't understand this. And so instead of, as terrible as this may sound, I'm not going to share the Black Lives Matter link about why Black Lives Matter to this person. I'm going to share something from Harper's Bazaar or something where they're going to first see the source and maybe they have already some sort of trust in that source versus, oh, this is something biased. This isn't something I would look at anyway. So just thinking about, as you are sharing information, as you're sharing articles with certain people, think about that source. Think about, you know, what media platform that is, and just try to, you know, match a little bit, because I think a lot of this does take some compassion, particularly as we're dealing with older people. You know, they've grown up with their own stigma, and changing people's minds is very hard. It's easier to teach somebody something new than to change their mind about something. So compassion, repetition, and just thinking about, you know, what's the audience that you're talking to, and how can you provide them with information that, you know, fits what, you know, something that they would be more receptive to. And I know maybe that's a little too fluffy, but it's something that I found effective on my end.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the best advice I guess I could give to fellow white people is force the conversation when you have to. You know, if you see something that you like that says Black Lives Matter, but you know your father isn't going to love it, post it anyway. You know, and if they insist on having the conversation, try to make them have the conversation publicly. If you can have an open conversation about this topic online, you can get input. You can, other resources will pop into the conversation and say, well, actually, I just read this and here's an article to support you. Or, my lived experience is this way. But if you can get them to write down what they're saying so they can go back and reread it, sometimes the going back and rereading it after they've processed it can help them say, okay, I didn't mean to just say, but I have a Black friend. But in that paragraph, what I said is I have a Black friend, so it's any way you can try to help someone hear what they are saying when they don't understand how what they're saying is incorrect or inappropriate.
I'll just add individually, explaining to those in my circle and getting them to understand that prejudice is just an emotional commitment to ignorance. And I know way too many intelligent people that will choose to remain willfully ignorant. So I on an individual level, that's where I am dealing with folks one-on-one. But systematically, I understand that there needs to be, I'm really teeter-tottering because I don't think that you can fix a system that's intentionally broken for some. I think we continue to try to fix something that was like, this is what it was designed to do. So why do you continue to try to put Band-Aids with all these amendments and all of these rights? Like, why do we do this? And when the bar continues to be moved anyway, and then things are presented in one way, but they actually do something different. Like I'm just kind of like, what can I do that's really tangible? What can I encourage people to do right now? One, I'm all about, I'm going to say we need to vote. I know we need to be engaged. I understand that is a privilege though. And I understand the work that is being done behind the scenes to continue to systematically oppress us in that way. So I'm all about supporting third-party voter registrations to make it easier for people. I think we really need to figure out how we can and what we can do to push an automatic and mandatory registration policy here in this nation. It should not necessarily, it's a right. It is our right to vote. So the bars and the hurdles that are put in place, they should not continue. And they continue to, again, impact disenfranchised disproportionately. So those need to be removed. So I'm all about supporting third-party registration. The other piece also is voting on the HEROES Act that I know is coming up too in the US Senate. That's all about voting and the US Census. I want to change the stigma of the census in my community. For far too long, it is something that has been feared because the minute, as you can imagine, you start giving folks information on your household, it is often used against you. So a lot of people will not register for that. That's just, they're not going to participate in that. But I know it's how our communities, how funding is allocated. And it definitely supports us in our voting. So that's really important. So getting people to understand the importance of voting, the importance of participating in the census. I mentioned the HEROES Act. The other piece just comes down to real, true investment. I want to see some real investment. I'm talking capital, I'm talking time, I'm talking talent in actual disenfranchised communities. I think until we are able to really reach a place of equity, these things are going to continue to happen. And if we're really saying, hey, we're gonna give it all that we got to make the change that we can make, then I think that's the most applicable approach that we can actually institute. So I'll leave us with this. Barack Obama posted a tweet today, and when I read it, I thought, wow, like that's synergy. That's speaking to what we're doing, what we're speaking of. I don't think I could have ever phrased it so eloquently, but this is in reference to Juneteenth. Okay, So Juneteenth has never been a celebration of victory or an acceptance of the way things are. It's a celebration of progress. It's an affirmation that despite the most painful parts of our history, change is possible. And there is still so much work to do.
TaShonda, can I toss a quote in there too?
No, we're done. Yes.
Okay.
If you get to toss in a quote, I get to say what I want to say.
Okay.
All right, only if it's a good one.
A word that Shaquille O'Neal created. I'm very quotacious, but one of the things that has been giving me some hope is this quote by this guy named Rabbi Tarfon, and he said, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." It's a lot of heavy stuff that's out there. If we all do a little bit, then nobody has to do a lot. We all have a lane. We all have a family. We all have a community. Do the work that you can do in your time, in your space, and in your place, and we will all begin to move forward.
Right on.
No, I just want to piggyback off of what you said about voting. Everybody needs to vote, but what I want to say is specifically to people in Massachusetts. Convicted felons, you can vote. So please register to vote. A lot of people who have criminal convictions think that they cannot vote. In Massachusetts, if you are not in prison, you can vote. So please go out, register to vote, and use your vote to make change.
And if you are pre-trial, you can actually still vote too.
Right.
So there are people who are being held in pre-trial facilities like Nashua Street in Boston. Yep. And so you are pre-trial, so you have not been convicted. So you actually still have the right to vote. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Yeah, so county jail, if you're in a county jail, if you're awaiting trial, you can still vote. And if you're a convicted felon and you're out of incarceration, you can vote. So please do register and vote. Your votes do count.
And so thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I want to thank all of our family here, Jennifer, Tito, Cara, Beth, thank you so much. I think that we managed to have a difficult conversation in a very tasteful and respectful manner. I think that we were able to be productive. And my hope is that we'll continue to remain engaged and keep the conversation going, and continue to advocate and communicate the opportunities for reform and actual justice within our communities. So from our hearts to yours, we love you all. We thank you for spending this time with us. And we truly hope that you were able to get something valuable from it.
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth. Everybody have a beautiful weekend, and thanks again for coming. And thank you to all our panelists today for your candor and your generosity of your just where you are. So thank you. And thanks to, we had a bunch of people on Facebook joining us. So thank you all for being here. Now it's almost 8 o'clock on Friday night. Go rest, be well, and have a lovely weekend. It's going to be beautiful here, at least in Massachusetts. So thanks again, everybody.
Take care.
Good night. Happy Juneteenth.
Bye.
Bye-bye.